Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session titled Building Your Surface Area for Serendipity. Many talented people would love to pursue an impactful career, but applying to jobs can be tough. It can feel like playing the lottery, especially if you hear that there are thousands of other applicants for the same position. In this talk, Kevin Shia will discuss pragmatically how you can pursue a career in the farm to animal advocacy movement beyond simply applying for jobs. He will discuss how he became involved in the movement and common patterns he has observed in his community building work. The core concept presented will be building your surface area for serendipity and related ideas such as networking and creating your own opportunities. Kevin Shia is managing director at Hive, an organization that empowers over 4,500 farmed animal advocates across over 100 countries to find the people, resources, and support they need to realize their potential for impact. Kevin's background is in philosophy, and he started an effective animal advocacy group in Austria, where he has also supported the effective altruism community as a board member since 2023. As a reminder, if you have any questions for the speaker, you can submit them via the Swapcard app. I'll be selecting a mix of your questions and some prepared ones during our Q&A. We will also be having office hours immediately following the session in the gather round for continued discussion. Now, with all that out of the way, please join me in welcoming Kevin Shia to the stage.
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone, and thank you all for being here. It's incredible that there are so many people who are dedicating at least a weekend of their life to figuring out how they can have more impact in the world. I believe that it is fair to assume that a lot of you have recently applied to a job in the effective altruism or in the animal advocacy movement. And if you did, especially if it was an entry-level and remote global friendly position, then you may have received an unfortunate rejection. Now, if you haven't received a rejection, congratulations, but also, why are you here? Either way, your rejection may have highlighted that it was a very competitive role. Perhaps it was one where there were more than 1,300 applicants. And these numbers can make it feel like finding a job in the movement is like playing the lottery. And you're not alone. Well, I mean, there are at least 1,298 people who've gone through the same. But I also think that many of us on this call have been there, having notifications set up for several job boards, pouring hours into applications, and then seeing such a number of applicants, or worse, hearing nothing back. My name is Kevin. I got involved with effective altruism about 3 years ago. In fact, the online EA conference 2 years ago was my first ever EA conference. So back then I was studying philosophy, and it's been quite a ride. Nowadays, I'm the managing director of Hive, a global community for farmed animal advocates. We help advocates realize their opportunities for impact, which often involves supporting them in their career journey to make sure that they don't throw away their shot. Because of my role and because of my journey, I often get asked about how I actually got into my job. And for a long time, I was very hesitant with sharing it. It felt like it was riddled with luck and privilege, like I was often in the right place at the right time. But the more I shared it, the more I realized that there were particular patterns and takeaways that could be useful for others. So I decided to talk about it more publicly. I've come to believe that the key to finding your entry into the movement is not by filling out more and more job applications, but a concept called increasing your surface area for serendipity. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I want to share my story. I want to talk a little bit about why increasing your surface area for serendipity works. And hopefully I'll end with a couple of takeaways for you to use yourself in your job search, perhaps at this very conference. So a little bit about me. Let's rewind. 2022, I was studying philosophy. I was planning to become a professor, and I was doing some local vegan activism on the side. And I thought I had a pretty good handle on how to change the world. Me being vegan was important, so me making more vegans would be more important. People are influenced by ideas. Some of the most important ideas came by philosophers. So surely becoming a philosopher would help change the world. But then I realized three fundamental truths at the exact same time. First, I learned that evidence exists. Shocker, I know. Since I was studying psychology next to my philosophy degree, initially as a fallback option, I thought, as a philosophy student, I have the option to be a professor or homeless. I was quite interested in social psychology. So I read through a textbook as part of my lectures, and page after page, I found extremely interesting studies and research about how human behavior is quite different from how we would expect it to be. This was important to me because in a lot of my activism, my goal was inspiring behavior change, but this was largely rooted in vague intuitions about how humans work. And I realized that it could be based on solid evidence instead. Second, I learned that I might be wrong. So I read Tobias Leonhard's book, it's How to Create a Vegan World, and it systematically proved me wrong on almost all of my beliefs. So section after section, Tobias outlines an approach that I personally disagreed with, and I thought, oh well, that's interesting, but have you thought about this and that counter argument? Only for the section to end with a list of counter arguments, including all the ones that I had thought of, and Tobias's direct response to them. This was very humbling, but extremely important because I realized that there were people who thought about these issues for far longer than I had, who knew all the arguments that I made and more, and still came out the other side. And third, I learned that I could aim higher. As you can imagine, I was quite excited about all of this research and Tobias's book, so I got more involved with our local effective altruism community. Through these conversations, I realized that my career may be the single biggest lever in my ability to affect change in the world. So then choosing the right career became an immensely important decision rather than choosing a career that generally does some amount of good. I found it to be important to systematically analyze and question my approach to doing good to make sure that I leverage these 80,000 hours as best as I can. As you may expect, becoming a philosophy professor was quickly out of the picture. So there I was. I was full of excitement, of energy and ambition, but I had no idea where to start. I had no relevant experience as someone who studied philosophy in their bachelor's. I had no career planning experience either. Job boards were fairly rare, and the few positions that did exist were ridiculously competitive, or far out of my reach, often both. So, absent of any opportunities that I could realize, I decided to focus on creating my own opportunities. I couldn't find a job or even a well-advertised volunteer opportunity, so I looked for problems that I could help solve. I was excited about this social psychology research, but no one in my advocacy circles was talking about it. So I went to two friends of mine because I was too nervous to do it alone, and we decided to give a talk at a local animal rights conference about these findings. I wanted to bridge this gap between the effective altruist type of thinking and evidence with our local animal advocacy community that I've come to greatly appreciate for their ambition and their hard work. So I went to our EA Austria board president and I suggested to start an effective animal advocacy group in Austria. He asked me to pursue this project myself as part of the EA Austria board, which I thought was way out of my reach, but I applied nonetheless and eventually found myself to be board president of EA Austria. I didn't want to start this group based on mere intuitions about how humans work and how we can incite them to think more about effectiveness. So another friend of mine and I started a small research project. We launched a survey to more than 400 vegans in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland about perceptions and misconceptions around effective animal advocacy related issues to identify potential gaps and opportunities to work on. While I was doing all of that work with EA Austria, I realized that a lot of people were asking about a more systematic way to learn about effective animal advocacy. I was already facilitating some introductory fellowships with EA virtual programs and with our local community, so I thought I would just facilitate one on effective animal advocacy. So I looked for resources to find a reading list or a curriculum. I didn't find any finished reading list that was up to date or up to standards. So I decided to create my own. This is some foreshadowing. Now, none of these things had a job description, and for most of them, no one asked me to do them. The key takeaway here is that you don't have to wait for permission or a formal role description to start contributing. You can speak at conferences, you can build communities, you can start small research projects, you can just find a gap and start filling it. And you don't have to do it alone. In fact, I wouldn't have done any of these if it wasn't for my friends who encouraged me along the way. Now, I believe that a lot of the work that I did mattered on its own right, but a lot didn't. They didn't lead anywhere, really. However, this work did help me build my skills and my confidence. Most importantly, it helped me build my visibility, which turned out to be crucial in my next step. So this brings me to the core idea that I want to talk about today, your surface area for serendipity. Our executive director, Sophia, always likes to paint this image. Imagine trying to get a job is like trying to exit Grand Central Station at rush hour. Now, for those of you who are as unaware about the United States as I am, there's like a huge train stop in New York City. Everyone is pushing towards the same main exit. That's the job application portal. And it's a huge bottleneck. Even if you're incredibly qualified, your odds just aren't that great. Because the thing is, job boards, just like an exitway at a train station, are popular because they are legitimate, they are useful, and in a meaningful way, they are predictable. You know what to do and you know how to do it. But that's exactly why they're overcrowded. So what if, instead, you stepped aside and you found a different route, a quieter, less obvious one, a path less traveled, so to speak, one that has no clear markings as to how to get out, but that will get you out of the train stop faster nonetheless. This is what you may want to call going the other way. Let's illustrate this with this hiring pyramid that I've borrowed from the brilliant people at High Impact Professionals. From the bottom to the top, you can see how employers prefer to hire in their organizations. So, of course, internal promotions and lateral moves are quite popular and not necessarily available to all of you. But context from existing staff, networking, and word of mouth, even professional organizations are all much preferred to conventional job applications. And from the top to the bottom, you can see how people tend to look for a job. It's exactly the wrong way around. The real opportunity lies in going the other way, focusing on context from existing staff and networking and all these whispers that happen in the background as an organization is starting to consider hiring a new staff member. Now, serendipity is by definition a matter of luck, and luck is not in your control. You will not be guaranteed to run across the exact same person that will hire you with the exact right pitch at this very conference. But what you can control is how often you encounter opportunities where you might become lucky. That is to say that you can increase the surface area for serendipity to happen. So your surface area for serendipity then is a measure of the number of ways that people in the movement can find you, remember you, trust you, and want to collaborate with you. It's the informal behind the scenes work that builds your reputation. Let's think about this from a time investment perspective. You could easily spend 100, 200 hours filling out job applications for hiring rounds that have a 0.5 to 2% success rate, or in the case of 1,300 applications, a 0.07% success rate. Crucially, most of that effort just disappears into the void. Now, sometimes a hiring manager may remember your application and remember you for a different role. You may be able to repurpose part of your applications and you're learning something with every application you write. But after an initial set of applications, that's a ton of work that doesn't really lead anywhere if your application gets rejected. Now, in contrast, imagine investing 100 or 200 hours into serendipity building activities like volunteering a few hours a week on a project that you care about, sharing thoughtful comments or resources and platforms, and discussions where your potential employers might hang out, such as this very conference or the Hive Slack. Organizing a small reading group or contributing to your local EA community or starting a small research project or summarizing key research and insights and spreading them to a wider audience. This creates dozens of positive touch points. You're not just an applicant, you're a somewhat familiar name. You're building a reputation for being proactive, thoughtful, and reliable. Crucially, your work remains visible and your reputation grows over time. From what we've seen at Hive, this kind of sustained contribution can lead to 3, 4, 5 low competition, high trust opportunities a year. Things like an invitation to apply for a role before it's public or that will never go public, a paid work trial for a project that isn't formally hiring, or even co-creating a brand new role with someone who already knows your value, wants to work with you, but doesn't have the exact role fit for you just yet. Of course, serendipity is still about luck. It's about being in the right place at the right time. But the goal here is to be in lots of places all the time so that luck has a much larger target to hit. So, how did this play out for me? All the work that I was doing, the conference talk, the local group organizing, the survey project, I was sharing all of it, or at least the process behind it, publicly. I mostly shared it on the Hive Slack. That was the community that felt most aligned with my work and the one that I felt most comfortable sharing my thoughts in. And it was a great win-win. I was able to get support and advice from expert advocates, and I could share my newfound insights with the rest of them. I was able to build connections from across the globe that still last today. Now, one of those people I connected with was Sophia, the co-founder of Hive. She noticed my activity on, well, her community space, and thankfully our work intersected quite a bit. I later also learned that someone else I had connected with over our survey project had mentioned my name to her. That those type of whispers in retrospect showcased how my surface area for serendipity was growing. So then at a conference I attended, she reached out for a one-on-one chat. Now, this was 2023. It was my first international animal rights related conference. I didn't know one-on-ones were a thing. So I felt extremely honored, and we had a great chat about all the questions I wanted to look into and the projects that I'm excited about. So after that, I kept her in the loop about my work and my projects. And one of them led to a volunteer opportunity with Hive, where I started building out their resource page on effective animal advocacy community building. While I got more and more involved with Hive as a volunteer, I also shared this effective animal advocacy reading list curriculum that I was working on in the Slack space, and I was asking for feedback. Several brilliant people provided their insights, and Sophia saw it and encouraged me to turn it into a proper online course. Now, at this point, it was a Google Doc. It had a couple of links. The plan was to share it with as a reading list with a group of like 5 people from Austria who wanted to attend this sort of course. And I thought turning it into a global online course truly wasn't my role to play. I was not an expert in the field, but her encouragement gave me an internal sense of permission that I needed. So I started building out the course on an online course platform. And a couple of weeks in, Zafia offered me a paid role with Hive and mentioned that my work on the course was the final push she needed to make this call. So I accepted on the spot. I started part-time and turned full-time about a month later when I immediately realized that my time was much better spent doing impact-focused work rather than studying. So a couple of months later, then that was at the end of 2024, I was promoted to managing director. So let's run a retrospective. What happened? What could be helpful and applicable for you in your journey? I came up with 4 key learnings that I hope to share with everyone here today. 1, I didn't wait to be asked. I believe that you can seek ways to contribute beyond job applications. Ultimately, I was driven by wanting to do good work, and not having a job wouldn't stop me. 2, I started small and learned along the way. My projects snowballed into a lot of different things over time and often came as a result from one another. If I tried to identify the perfect set of projects to begin with, I probably would never have started in the first place. So if your alternative is not doing anything at all, just start somewhere and learn as you go. 3, I got involved with a promising organization while it was still small and scrappy. In retrospect, I think this was hugely advantageous because as they scaled up, I was one of the first persons they turned to when wanting to make a hire because they knew I was highly mission aligned and were familiar with my work. And 4, perhaps the most important one, because I was reliable and proactive as a volunteer, I was trusted with more and more responsibilities. I kept suggesting new ways I could help out with Hive because I truly believe in its mission. And I can now more confidently tell, sitting on the other end of the table, that hugely reliable and proactive volunteers who continuously seek to do more and think about how they can contribute themselves are incredibly rare and therefore very valuable, and they stand out a lot. Now, none of this was part of my secret master plan to get a job. I was pursuing projects that I thought were important, but they were not. And I was sharing my work along the way. The job was like a byproduct of making myself useful in public. I think this is very important because I think if you don't pursue projects that you believe matter in their own right, you may quickly lose motivation. Building your surface area for serendipity as a concept doesn't have a clear progression bar, it doesn't have feedback loops. So, believing in what you're doing for its own sake is crucial to keep up this sort of motivation and stay sustainable. The goal here is consistency, not intensity. A little bit of thoughtful engagement week after week is far more powerful than a frantic burst of activity that all of you might experience due to the conference being now, right? So just be consistent, be reliable, be curious, and be kind. People notice. Thank you. I've got a couple of resources here for those of you who want to learn more. And want to read further into my own career journey and building a service area for serendipity and about Hive, of course. Feel free to scan the QR code. And yeah, now back to you, Sebastian, for the Q&A section.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that amazing presentation. We now have some time for questions. So remember, you are allowed to send questions of your own through the Swapcard app, and then we will be able to see them through there, and we will be going back and forth between some prepared questions and your own. So you said at the beginning of your presentation that you were hesitant to share your story because you thought that there was a lot of luck and a lot of privilege involved, right? And the first thing that my mind went to immediately was imposter syndrome, especially because after long periods of unemployment, one can feel like a fraud when you actually land the opportunity, right? We have this trend of failure, rejection, and then when you finally get the job, it's like, okay, well, this is not what I'm used to. So I'm wondering, did you ever face imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you manage it?
Yeah, yeah, I think I struggled a lot with imposter syndrome without knowing that I did. I think I've managed it, which is not to say that I don't have imposter anymore. I just know how to deal with it, so to speak. So
Mhm.
in mid 2023 or so, when I was getting more involved with the EA movement, I saw a podcast from 80,000 Hours about imposter syndrome. It was an article. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I haven't heard of that before. And the person writes about or describes their experience. And then one thing they said really struck with me. They said something along the lines of, um, well, no, I don't have imposter syndrome. These people have imposter syndrome, but I am a real imposter. So it's not like some sort of like weird syndrome that and I was like, oh yeah, that's me. Um, and whether you have imposter syndrome or are a real imposter is almost besides the point. The key downside, or one key downside of imposter syndrome, is that you're not aiming for opportunities that are good fits for you. So I thought, okay, I have no idea whether I'm an actual imposter or just have imposter syndrome. I'll just apply to a couple of things that I think are far out of my reach, because what's the worst thing that can happen? I'll get a no, which is exactly what I'd expected, right? But the worst thing if I don't apply is that there's a huge opportunity that I'm missing out on. So then for the EA Austria board, when the board president said, hey, why don't you apply yourself? I was like, wait a second, I've been in this community for like 4 months and I learned about EA like 1 month before that. What do I do in this board? But I was also like, okay, I'll just apply for things that are far out of my reach and see what happens. And to my surprise, I got voted in. And to my surprise, I got voted in with the most votes. And suddenly I was board president of EA Austria, which
Mhm.
was very, very scary. But I thought, hey, I have quite a bit of time nowadays. I have a great board around me. This seems like a cool growth opportunity. And it turned out to be. So I still feel like an imposter. I just try to make sure that it doesn't hold me back in my journey to make an impact by not limiting myself based on what I believe I'm a good fit for. I let others
Awesome.
decide, so to speak.
Oh, that's amazing. And that's really helpful for sure. So specifically talking about other people that you work with, I'm going to combine a couple of questions here that we're getting on Swapcard. Do you have any advice for rallying up people around a common idea and cooperating, right? It sounds like other collaborating with other people was really important. And in that same vein, your own motivation, right? How do you keep motivated in working through these projects on your own while you are, looking for a job?
Yeah, so it's definitely easiest if you have a strong support network. In my case, it was a group of friends that I was with. We all knew each other from sort of vegan activist circles, and we had often had a lot of philosophical discussions about how we can end factory farming much sooner. So then when I got involved with effective altruism, I was like, hey, everyone, other people are having these discussions too, and they're actually doing something with it. They were quite keen to jump on board. My sense in that case was that a lot of people are happy to be part of something, to be part of a group, to do things together. And what is often missing is a person who just kind of kickstarts it, someone who takes the lead, not in the sense of actually being a leader in the group, but to actually takes the first step and move things along. I think if you have a clear concept and a clear way for people to contribute, you'll often find way more people than you'd expect willing to take part in your projects. So that's on
Awesome.
we're getting people involved. And especially nowadays, you can start projects from everywhere across the world and collaborate with people across the world. So if you reach out to people at this conference who seem to have a background that is very valuable to what you want to do, I'm sure you'll get surprising great resonance. Yeah.
Great, great. We also have a couple of questions from generalists in the chat in Swapcard. So, how would you apply the teachings of your journey to people who are not necessarily as honed in on one specific cause yet and are still trying to figure out what path to go down?
So I love generalists. My first role title was generalist. I come from a background in philosophy, and I figured, well, that's not exactly what I'll do in my day-to-day job then. So I became part community builder, part researcher, part MEL person, and then I started managing people. So I think that itself is really cool. So when it comes to cause areas, there's definitely a sense in which if you're really familiar with a course area and you have all the context and you know all the people, you have a much better chance to grow your surface area for serendipity, so to speak, because you're working with a much smaller group of people and your name travels further and quicker. If you don't want to hone in on any specific cause area, without giving course area specific advice or where you should move into. I think EA community building, this sort of meta perspective, is a hugely underrated way to get a lot of experience, to get to know all the right people, build your network, and learn more about what you want to do. I think EA community building is uniquely accessible to many people. Having run a local group, we were continuously, desperately looking for people who would suggest that they want to contribute and help organize events and help us out in the background of things. And in doing that, you get exposure to all of these different ideas and to all of these different people and
Of
can learn
course.
more about where you want to move into.
Okay, okay, yeah, that's really cool. And I think in that search, you're coming across all these different opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And that makes me think, for example, of you mentioned you had these three realizations at the same time, right? Evidence exists, you might be wrong, and that you should be aiming higher. Specifically with those last two, if in my head, if I were to realize that I might be wrong, my instinct would be, oh, I should aim lower, not higher, because I might be wrong. So how do you reconcile the humility of accepting that you're wrong, along with the need to aim for opportunities that seem out of your reach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it was never really a conflict. I felt like when I realized, and obviously I knew that I might be wrong on things, but when I realized in a very
Hmm.
salient way that I might be wrong on something that I dedicated lots of my time to, it was more freeing and opening myself up to all sorts
Hmm.
of opportunities, including opportunities that have far more potential for impact than I had previously considered possible. So one area that I
Hmm.
might be wrong on is how much impact I could have, and I might have drastically underestimated that. So those things kind of came hand to hand when I first learned that you can work full time to help animals. I was like,
Hmm.
wait, this is so much more impact than I ever thought about, really. It just didn't occur to me. I thought, oh, professor for animal ethics, let's go. That's what Peter Singer did. I mean, but yeah, so in many ways, this sort of Realizing I might be wrong made me aim higher because it made me realize I might be wrong about the cap on my ambitions and was much more
Hmm.
open, or I was much more open to the possibility of doing much more.
Interesting. So in a way, it became that you might be wrong about your own skill set, and therefore you might be limiting yourself by not applying to opportunities that you think are out of reach. Okay, that's really, really
Exactly.
cool. You also mentioned that a lot of these efforts were separate from your ego, right? In a way, they were just efforts towards a cause that mattered to you.
Yeah.
Immediately I think about the idea behind effective altruism, right? The idea of altruism, you're just giving your time, you're dedicating yourself to this cause. But that seems to clash with the process of looking for a job, because inherently in looking for a job, you are hoping for the result of receiving the job offer in exchange, right? So the altruism kind of seems to go against that. So my question would be, how can people separate the process from the outcome of looking for employment, from yes, so separating the outcome from the process in looking for the job?
Yeah, I mean, it usually depends on your job security and your financial stability. But the way that I view these things is that finding a job is actually just an instrumental part to the real goal that is making an impact. So then applying for jobs becomes a mission of figuring out where you can actually have the most impact. And if you can align these two things, if the outcome of getting a job happens to then also be the outcome of making a lot of impact because you're focusing on the jobs where you can truly contribute, then that becomes a non-issue. Of course, there are all sorts of different life situations in which you may not have the luxury to just reject job offers because they don't seem quite impactful enough, and there are a lot of tricky considerations as to when you should take these and when you should try a little bit further.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's in these situations, I think it's very personal, but the way that I conceptualize these, getting a job is only an instrument in order to make an impact.
Hmm. Okay, okay. Interesting. And in this talk about making an impact too, one of the conversations that we keep having within the effective altruism scape is the idea of cost prioritization, right? So choosing a specific path to go down and dedicating yourself to it. We have a question in the chat about how you choose to prioritize work within animal welfare, right? So they talk, for example, about suffering among pets versus suffering among factory farming. How would you say you go around picking, even within that same topic of animal welfare, what to focus on?
Yeah, I think from a zoomed out perspective, what I personally do is I sort of looked at the from a very typical EA lens, what seems to be the biggest problem just by the conditions that these animals suffer and the scale that they are suffering in it from. Where do there seem to be real tractable solutions to work on, and what seems to be drastically underfunded or under-resourced? And just from the zoomed out perspective, I think animals in labs, companion animals, animals in entertainment quickly seem a bit less important just because of the relative amount of efforts that are already going into them compared to the scale versus factory farming or even wild animal welfare. And then the more you zoom in, the more I think it just becomes a matter of your personal fit. I think most problems within effective altruism are at a level of impact so similar to one another that it's truly a matter of where are you well positioned to actually make an impact, and you will often be much you will overall probably have more impact by pursuing what you're actually really good at once you have zoomed in enough into these different cause areas,
Mhm.
especially within one cause area where you then only look into species or regions or categories of animals.
Interesting. So just to wrap up here the Q&A and the answer that you just gave us, it sounds like a lot of the connecting thread for your talk and for these answers is to just go ahead and do things, right? To go ahead and explore and get out there and figure out what it is that on one hand moves you, and on the other hand are the most pressing problems that you come across in trying to do the work. How would you say your experience in finding that path was? Were there any paths that you thought were going to be a lot more relevant than before? Were there any glaring problems that you noticed in the cause work that you were doing that shifted your perspective?
I mean, probably not in a big way. I think when I started looking
Mhm.
into cost prioritization, the key areas that I looked into were farmed and wild animal welfare, EA meta, and similar to that, global priorities research. And I don't think I came across anything that drastically changed my mind on which of these matters the most. So I kind of just went with my personal fit, with the areas of expertise that I've accumulated over time, and feel quite comfortable where I'm at. There are more fine-grained areas where I've slightly changed my mind on. I'm slightly less optimistic on EA meta because I have stronger opinions on the difference of effectiveness between cause areas. So then focusing on specific cause areas becomes more important, right? Or within animal advocacy, I've come to appreciate and try to wrap my head around the importance of artificial intelligence on the welfare of non-human animals. So there are a lot of these minor areas where some things that I thought to be really important, say take vegan diet change, then in a large scale of things just seem to be slightly less important. But they were not usually in a fashion in which I was steering full speed into one direction and then had to brake and move somewhere else entirely. There were continuous small improvements over time.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. That's all we have time for. I do want to bring up that there were people in the chat who caught all the Hamilton references throughout your presentation. So, because I know that that was something that you snuck in for all of us to enjoy. But for those who want to continue this conversation, Kevin will be available for office hours starting right now in Gather Round. So I will be sharing the link for it as well in the Swapcard chat. But thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Kevin, so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And we are very, very grateful for you being here. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you for having me.